Hi class, today we're going to talk about mood disorders. One of the difficulties in understanding psychological disorders is that a lot of the symptoms of a psychological disorders are common symptoms, things that everyone experiences. The difference is about intensity and frequency. So how severe are the symptoms and how frequent they are? For example, with anxiety disorders, everyone worries, but not everyone has anxiety disorder. It's about how often the symptoms occur and how intense these symptoms are. And do these symptoms cause distress or dysfunction for people who are experiencing them? We're going to talk about anxiety disorders. And the anxiety disorders we're going to start off with are generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and phobia. And then we'll move to OCD and PTSD. Generalized anxiety disorder is oftentimes thought of as a free-floating disorder. What does that mean? That means that people with generalized anxiety disorder worry about everything. They are constantly worried. Their worry just kind of shifts from one thing to the next. The person has to experience these symptoms for at least 6 months before it can be diagnosed, and it is more common in women than in men. The chief symptom of panic disorders are panic attacks. Panic attacks are sudden, and they come along with physical symptoms such as tightening of chest, irregular heartbeat, trembling, dizziness. This is all very similar to what people experience when they experience heart attacks. People are so afraid of having panic attacks that it may actually lead to agoraphobia. Basically, they become scared of going out in places and having a panic attack where other people can observe them and see them having it. So this can actually lead to people avoiding public situations and even avoiding leaving their own home for fear they'll have a panic attack in public. Phobia is different from a fear. Everybody has fears. Not everyone has phobias. So phobia is a specific anxiety around a specific thing. And this anxiety is so great that it causes distress to the person and causes dysfunction for the person's day-to-day lives. So again, everybody has fear. So fear is a symptom of a phobia, but this fear has to be intense and it has to be frequent and it has to interfere with a person's life. I hear all the time people say things like, oh, I'm so OCD. Chances are you're not. OCD is a psychological disorder that's not just marked by neatness or liking things in a specific way. OCD is a disorder in which a person has to have things in a certain way. If they don't, they experience extreme anxiety. And in order to get rid of this anxiety, they have to perform a specific act. So this is not just liking to have things neat or liking to be orderly. This is a psychological disorder that is persistent and unavoidable, and a person cannot just go about their day if something is not done in order to relieve this anxiety. There are two parts of OCD, obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are the thoughts, compulsions are the behaviors. So the thoughts, a person has a thought and they have to do the behavior in order to get rid of the thought. So that's how OCD works. Post-traumatic stress disorder is caused by trauma. When a person experiences a trauma, it's actually quite common for them to be jumpy, easily startled, have bad dreams, etc. Most of the time, these symptoms go away within the first couple of weeks. If these symptoms persist for longer than 30 days, it has progressed to post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is more common in women. It's more common in people who have experienced multiple traumas, and it's more common in people who have experienced prolonged traumas. Traumas that can cause PTSD include things like wars, accidents, rape, domestic abuse, etc. Major depressive disorder is oftentimes considered the common cold of psychological disorders. Current estimates are that about 1 in every 4 people will experience at least one episode of major depression in your lifetime. So it's quite common. Some symptoms of major depression includes things like the inability to sleep or sleeping too much, gaining or losing a lot of weight, extreme feelings of sadness, feelings of helplessness, thoughts of suicide, thoughts of self-injury. These are all symptoms of major depression. With bipolar disorder is a combination of major depression and mania. People go through both extremes. Major depression, again, is those extreme feelings of sadness, kind of being down. With mania, the person experiences a lot of energy, feelings of really high self-esteem, a lot of feelings of euphoria, happiness, etc. So they have both extremes. They have those extreme down feelings, but they also have extreme up feelings. In order to be diagnosed with major depression, a person has to experience at least 2 weeks of severe symptoms and frequent symptoms. And 2 of the symptoms have to be, 1, a depressed mood, and 2, a loss of interest or pleasure in things that they once found pleasurable. And there's other symptoms as well to look for in terms of diagnosing this disorder. Everybody has experienced sadness, so major depression isn't just a normal emotion that people experience. Major depression is about frequency and the intensity of these feelings. There are different manifestations of bipolar disorder, but in order to be diagnosed, there's 2 things that must exist. You must have at least 1 episode of major depression and at least 1 episode of mania. Mania is like a hyperactive, really optimistic state in which a person feels on top of the world, they feel creative, but it's just kind of a very high elevation of mood. So again, with bipolar, you have to experience both a major depressive episode and a manic episode in order to be diagnosed. Again, back to the brain. With major depression, you see a lot of really interesting things happening within the brain that's common for people who are experiencing depressive symptoms. One of the things you see is an imbalance of neurotransmitters. One of the big ones in terms of major depression is serotonin. With depression, you see an inactivity or not enough serotonin in the brain. You also see a norepinephrine imbalance. So the brain is really interesting in terms of how the brain can affect feelings. Like I've said a lot of times before, one of the ways in order to increase or change the chemistry within your brain is physical exercise. Physical exercise helps to increase serotonin and also releases endorphins within your brain that helps keep you happy. So exercise, exercise, exercise. Suicide is one of those things that have to be considered when you're talking about psychological disorders. There's a lot of myths out there surrounding suicide. One of the biggest myths is that if someone tells you that they're going to commit suicide, it is just trying to get attention. They don't really want to do it. That is incorrect. 90% of everyone who commits suicide tells someone beforehand that they're going to do it. So every time someone mentions suicide or killing themselves, it should be taken seriously.